What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, and I'm your host, and we've got a good show for you today. In just a moment, we're going to talk a bit about the negotiations between Major League Baseball and the Players Association, and then we're actually going to have a special guest. Justin Lorber, also known as Future Dodgers, is going to join us to talk about the draft. But before we get to Justin, let's talk a little bit about the negotiations. Monday morning, the league offered a proposal to the players, and, well, it didn't go great. So here's kind of the basics that you need to know. The league proposed a 76-game season in which 50% of the players' pay would be guaranteed and 75% of their pay would be received if the playoffs were to happen. So 75% of their prorated salary. So whatever they are to make on a per-game basis, they would get 50% of that for a 76-game season no matter what. And if the playoffs are able to happen where the league makes a bunch of their money, they get an additional 25%. So 75% of the prorated. To put it into simpler numbers, I appreciated Jeff Passan. He kind of broke it down. Basically, the league has agreed to pay about $1 billion in salary to the players. And if the playoffs happen, another $440 million gets paid out. So to compare that to the previous proposal that the league had made, which was a 50-game season, the total guaranteed salary was about the same of $1 billion. However, in the 50-game scenario, there was zero additional dollars if the playoffs were paid. So there's a $440 million difference if playoffs are played, as well as a 26-game additional regular season. So the league, also offered the dropping of draft pick compensation. So if a player were to receive a qualifying offer, it would not cost a team a draft pick to sign that player, which is a big deal for the Players Association, but that would just be for the year. So now one thing I think we have to do when we think about and evaluate something like this is we have to aspire to nuance. And what I mean by that is we need to be able to think critically. We need to be able to evaluate these offers and these proposals for what they are. Because so often what I see on Twitter is just one person interpreting everything through whatever lens. You're either pro player, you're pro owner, and there's no nuance. There's no ability to say, you know what, this part of this was good and this part of this was terrible. And so here's what I mean. Let me make the argument for both sides. So first, let me defend the owners a little bit here. The players came out today and they said, this is a terrible offer. This is a step backwards. Okay, let's pause for a second because, yes, it's slightly less money than the last offer from Major League Baseball, which, again, is a massive drop-off from the Players Association's proposal for 114 games at full prorated salaries. But it does include draft pick compensation, which is a big deal to the players. And it's also a better offer, almost unequivocally, than the last offer, especially if the playoffs happen. So if the playoffs don't happen, you play 25 extra games, you make the same amount of money. But if the playoffs do happen, we're talking about a 40 to 45% increase in the total money that players are making. Okay, so if the playoffs happen, there's a 40 to 45% increase. Now, you might be saying, well, that's if the playoffs happen. Well, remember this. The Players Association, their last proposal included a 114-game season. If you're suggesting a 114-game season, does that sound like a group of people that is concerned about the coronavirus coming back and a second wave in the fall? Now, I think they should be worried about a second wave. But from the owner's perspective, they're saying, look, you want to play 114 games. You're clearly confident that we'll be able to get through that into the playoffs. So why would you be concerned about some contingencies on a playoff proposal that you seem fairly confident is going to happen? So if I'm the owners, I'm saying you're not worried about the second wave. You shouldn't be worried about missing the playoffs, meaning we just offered you 44% more money than the previous offer. Now, you're going to make 75% of your prorated salaries, yes, but over more games, which means the more total dollars. So yes, you're not getting full prorated salaries for 50 games, but you're getting more total dollars because of the additional games. I did the math. It's something like the equivalent of 57 games worth of full pay in exchange for 75 games of play. So that's the owner's argument, and I want to clarify, that's not nothing, right? It's not worse than their previous offer, as the players would have you believe. However, if you're the players, here's the point that I would make. You've already drawn the line in the sand with full prorated salaries. You've told the owners repeatedly, over and over again, this is the one thing we unequivocally cannot and will not compromise on, period. Okay, now maybe we can get deferrals. Maybe we can leave some percentage of that dependent on the playoffs. Now, they haven't made that offer, but I'm just saying maybe these are ways to work around it. But you cannot accept a scenario where 100% of prorated salaries is off of the table. You just can't. And there's two reasons for this. The first comes from Joe Sheehan from Baseball America and Sports Illustrated. He says, If they concede on salary, they're signing up for the idea that the league's profits are none of their business, but their losses are. Okay, so what he's saying is, if you accept this, you're just taking the league's word for it that they're going to be losing all this money, and you're never going to get access to those books. He said the only way you can accept less than prorated, he implies, is if the league opens up their books and can prove that they are going to lose money like they're claiming. Now, if they could prove it, I'm guessing they would have opened them up by now. But they'll never do that, and so the players have to hold firm. So that's reason number one. But the only way you could accept, the second point is along the same lines. Okay, we are less than 12 months away from needing a new collective bargaining agreement heading into the 2021 season. If there's one thing the players need to do at this point in negotiations, they need to prove their strength and they need to prove their resolve. If they cave on the one thing that they said they wouldn't cave on, full prorated salaries, if they cave on that, they will have zero leverage for the collective bargaining agreement coming up. Zero. Now, I wish it wasn't the case because all of this is complicating things for sure in a way that no other league has had to deal with, right? We compare this to basketball. Well, basketball didn't have to account for a full season, and basketball didn't have to account for the fact that a year from now, we're coming back to negotiation. So the point of all this is to say is this negotiation and understanding where we're at is complicated. The owners did make an offer, which I think deserves some credit, okay? And it was unequivocally, in my opinion, better than their last offer. Now, there are ways in which it's worse, but overall, we're talking about the potential for a 40 to 45% increase if playoff happens. Again, the players seem content to believe that it will. So I can't stress that enough. It is better. Unfortunately, their last offer was atrocious. So it's as if the owner's approach is to offer so many D- level deals that when they offer a D+ deal, we're supposed to react like they've really humbled themselves and made a good offer. Yes, this offer was better, but no, it wasn't good. So the question is now, what's next? Will the union negotiate? Will they offer a counter that gives even an inch financially? My guess is no. Or are we headed to the owners just forcing a 50-game season down the players' throats? We'll see. Now, we don't have so that's kind of the thing to watch. Optimism-wise, I still stand by the fact that it seems like worst-case scenario, the owners are going to force the players to play a 50-game season. They're going to offer them full prorated salaries. They're going to say, we get to choose this kind of thing. And we're just going to everyone's going to kind of grit their teeth and just get through the season. That's my hunch is the bottom line. That's like worst case scenario. I still have hope for something better, but I still do feel confident that baseball is going to happen. Now, while we don't have MLB baseball this week, we do have a major moment in the Major League Baseball year, which is the Major League Draft. Now, I know while NFL fans and NBA fans kind of obsess over their drafts, the baseball draft has historically been pretty ignored. I was thinking about it this week. Why is that? I mean, first of all, it's more complicated. The players are further away from making an impact, and we have to admit, far less likely to actually ever make an impact. And it's also longer. Now, this year it's not. We'll get to talk about that in a second, but it's a longer draft. You can't trade draft picks. But plus, I think the biggest thing, you're drafting guys nobody's ever heard of. Most people don't follow college baseball. They're definitely not following national high school baseball. And so with that in mind, while people aren't paying attention to it, it is a massively big deal. The Dodgers are where they are mostly because of how well they've drafted and how well they've developed. Far more than their deep pockets. People want to talk about the Dodgers' big salaries, etc. Keep in mind that the biggest contracts the Dodgers have given out have been to re-sign players already under contract, guys like Clayton Kershaw, Justin Turner, Kenley Jansen. With the exception of A.J. Pollock and Joe Kelly, there haven't really been a ton of guys signed for substantial money. I mean, we're not talking 9-figure contracts handed out to a free agent. Yes, the Dodgers traded for guys like Mookie Betts, but keep in mind, the way they acquired Mookie Betts was by trading prospects like Alex Verdugo that they had drafted and developed. And even if we go back and say, well, Kershaw and Jansen have these big contracts, well, those are guys the Dodgers signed or drafted themselves. Obviously, Turner came over as an unheralded free agent. Now, I was thinking to kind of put in perspective how important the draft is. If you were to make a list of the Dodgers' 10 best players, how many of those guys would you guess the Dodgers drafted just off the top of your head? Now, I just threw together a list, and this is in no particular order. But we've got Bellinger, Buehler, Jansen, Kershaw, Lux, Muncy, Seager, Turner, Betts. The 10th spot, maybe it's Dustin May, maybe it's Jock Peterson. I don't know. Regardless, the answer is the same. 7 of the Dodgers' 10 best players were drafted or signed by the Dodgers originally. Now, Muncy and Turner, I would almost include in there as guys that they developed. They signed them to minor league deals, basically off of the waiver wire. Any team in the league could have had them, but the Dodgers got them. So that's 9. The only guy on that list who doesn't meet those qualifications, of course, is Mookie Betts. But as I said, he, to some degree, should count because they acquired him via trade. by sending away guys that they had signed or drafted in Verdugo, Kenta Maeda, etc. So the point of all this is to say the draft is especially important, unbelievably important, and especially for the Dodgers. Just one more note I'll give you. Teams' first-round picks between 2012 and 2016, guys that maybe you would have expected to make an impact. 2012, Corey Seager. Chris Anderson, you've never heard of, he was a bust. Grant Holmes, who was traded for Rich Hill. Walker Buehler, Kyle Funkhauser, who didn't sign but gave them an extra pick the following year, allowing them to draft Gavin Lux, Will Smith, and Jordan Sheffield. So Sheffield is kind of the only guy still in the system that you probably haven't heard much about. He's a power arm, probably a reliever that's in the minors. Anderson was a bust. One guy who didn't sign, one guy who was traded. But you get the point, right? Cody Bellinger's a fourth rounder. Kershaw was a first rounder a long time ago. Dustin May, a third rounder. You get the point. The draft matters. And this Wednesday is the first round of what will be a 5-round draft, with the remaining rounds coming on Thursday. So with that in mind, we're going to bring back our prospect expert, our draft expert, friend of the show, Justin Lorber, better known to you as future Dodgers. So here's my interview with Justin. All right. Well, welcome, Justin. Thanks for being with us. As a big NFL draft guy, I know the week of the NFL draft is one of my favorite weeks of the year. So I imagine that you're feeling a bit of the same right now. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's a fun week. With a contending team, you don't really get many new prospects because you aren't trading guys away. So the draft and July 2nd are really the only times that we get new prospects into the organization.
Yeah.
So it's a fun week for sure.
Yeah. Well, I referenced this a little bit earlier, but for folks who are unfamiliar, I know as the draft starts on Wednesday, we've got a much different format than normal. What can you sort of summarize for us? What makes this year's draft a little bit different?
So to start off, it's been drastically shortened from 40 rounds down to 5 rounds. Every player after that is an undrafted free agent, and they can sign for up to $20,000, or they can head back to school because the NCAA granted all baseball players another year of eligibility. So a guy who's a senior now will be a senior next year as well. A guy who's a sophomore now will be a sophomore, and so on.
Got it. Well, one of the things, just as we look forward to the draft, the Dodgers picking the very last pick of the first round, some competitive balance stuff after them. But one of the things that I have heard, as somebody who's not as deep into this as you, is that this year's draft class was one that people were really looking forward to. It was supposed to be a really, really good class, is my understanding. How does the fact that it's a 5-round draft impact that? Was this more of a draft that was really, really good because, there's 25 high-end players? Or is it more of a draft where rounds 3 through 10 were going to be really, really strong?
I think both.
Okay.
Not in the sense of high-end players, like you've got 5 guys who are true number 1 picks, but you've got guys who won't go in the first round who could maybe go in the first round in a different year. It's a deep class overall, which is one of the reasons why the 5-round draft kind of sucks, because there's a lot of guys who should be drafted in a normal year who will not be drafted and will either be forced to take significantly less money, that $20,000 bonus, or head back to school and try again next year.
Yeah.
And specifically, the college pitching demographic is one that is really, really strong, one of the strongest college pitching groups we've seen. And it kind of made sense because last year it was a very weak college pitching group. So this year, completely different.
Yeah. And I mean, that was going to kind of be my next question. Aside from college pitching, are there any particular slots or positions just for sort of keep your eye on?
I'd say college pitching and high school bats, at least if you're looking in the first rounds.
Okay.
There should be quite a few high school bats. There should be a lot of college pitchers. I remember when I started doing draft research for this class last summer on FanGraphs top, I think 30 or 32, it was something like 40% college pitchers.
Wow.
So this has been a good college pitching class since last summer, and it has stayed that way throughout the spring.
Well, I mean, we've got a little bit of extra time here, and before we dive into the Dodgers, I'm just as fascinated as a fan. Like, what does the process look like for you as you sort of are doing some scouting, as you're evaluating these prospects? I mean, it's unique because when I'm doing stuff for the NFL draft, it's like there's tape on every single one of these guys all over the place because they're playing on national TV. Whereas when we talk about the baseball draft, a third to half of the first round picks are guys that are playing high school baseball somewhere. So what does it look like for you, when you turn the page on 2021, what does it look like for you to kind of start evaluating players?
So it starts definitely by going through not the college boards, the public boards, FanGraphs, Baseball America,
Okay.
Perfect Game, Prep Baseball Report. stuff like that, because those are the guys tracking 2021, 2022, and even 2024.
Jeez.
If you want rankings for high school freshmen,
Yeah, I was
they
going to
are
say,
available.
get me some 14-year-old scouting reports, please.
I can't go that far ahead. I usually stick to 1 year at a time, but that's the first place I look.
Okay.
And then it's picking out certain guys with interesting profiles, and then looking at the video. If they're a college player, looking at their statistics. High school statistics aren't really
Yeah.
worth looking at, but high school players actually do have more tape than you would think.
Yeah.
All of the best players usually attend showcases over the summer between their junior and senior years, and then scouts scout them pretty heavily in fall ball or in the spring. And there's usually some pretty recent tape of every guy going in the top 2 or 3 rounds.
And I mean, is that tape that you have access to, or is that more of like you're getting sort of a shortened video of like a 3-minute highlight clip of some high school pitcher pitching in a sort of all-star game type setting?
There's tons of public stuff available. If you were to Google or search on Twitter or YouTube just someone's name, you could find a lot of tape on this year's high school class for the guys who are going to go in the first and second rounds.
And just, I mean, you personally, just out of curiosity, I mean, what is your background as far as, I mean, obviously you're not like a professional scout. That doesn't mean you're not as qualified as some of them, but how do you how did you get into the process of sort of looking at tape and breaking down tape, that kind of thing?
So I wouldn't necessarily say it's breaking down tape. I don't think I'm at that point yet. Just kind of looking at it and seeing if there are certain indicators, like this guy has good bat speed.
Got it.
You know, he adjusts well to off-speed pitches, stuff like that. Stuff, if you're a baseball fan, you know, you could probably pick up pretty easily.
Got it.
And then pitchers, athleticism, arm speed. But I'd say it's a mix of scouting and definitely reading the professional reports, because as I will say again, I'm not a professional scout. I do my best, but those guys actually know what they're doing. And, you know, if there's something looking at strikeout to walk numbers for college guys, stuff like that.
Got it. Well, let's dive into the Dodgers. The Dodgers are picking 29th this year, which again, as I said, is the last pick in the first round, although it gets confusing because when you say the end of the first round, it doesn't mean the last people picking on day one. We've got some competitive balance picks as well that complicate things. But the Dodgers pick at 29, 60, 66, 100, 130, and 159. So while they have a couple extra picks, my understanding is they also don't have a ton of money because they're picking at the bottom of rounds. I believe they have the 8th lowest total amount of money that they can spend prior to undrafted free agency. So looking at that, looking at pick number 29, help me understand. How good of a player are we looking at pick 29? Are we talking about a surefire future starter? I mean, and again, I know in baseball terms, like it's swing and miss all over the place in the Major League Baseball draft. But I mean, at 29, are we looking for the next Gavin Lux, or are we kind of looking for the next Kike Hernandez?
Well, Gavin Lux would be, you know, a 95th to 100th percentile outcome.
Okay.
For a guy in that range. That's, you know, you're hitting a home run if you get a guy who turns out to be a top 5 prospect in all of baseball from one of those picks. You know, if you were to get a Kike Hernandez, someone who is a valuable contributor, maybe 1 to 2 WAR per year, can play a lot of positions, I think almost every team, if you told them guaranteed you're getting that type of player from pick number 29, almost every team would take that certainty. But this is a deep class. There are a lot of guys with upside, and they're going to get a very good player at pick 29.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, one of the things, again, for those unfamiliar with the baseball draft that makes it unique is, again, based on all of the places that you're picking, you just add up the slot values and you have essentially that much money. I know there's some accounting numbers and you can go a slight percentage over, but you're basically set on the amount of money. And so the problem for a team like the Dodgers picking at 29 is that even if a top 15 level talent is sitting there on the board at number 29, you can't pay them top $15 unless you start pulling some money from pick 60's slot and 66 slot. So, I mean, from your perspective, as you're evaluating that, how do you think through those decisions? Because, I mean, every year that I follow the draft, even as sort of a novice from afar, there always seems to be 1 or 2 guys that fall and fall and fall to the point where it's actually too far and they're not ever going to get picked with a realistic chance of signing. So from your perspective, you're the Dodgers at 29. I mean, are you willing to just sort of go all in on pick 29 and draft some underslot guys for the rest if you can get a top 15 talent? How do you think through that?
Well, like you said, it depends who's on the board. If a guy like Mick Abel, right-handed pitcher from Oregon, or Nick Bitsko, right-handed pitcher from Pennsylvania, is on the board, and they're asking for, say, $3.5 million, that's $1.1 million over their slot value for pick 29. They can spend up to 105% of their bonus pool, which gives them an extra $300,000. But now you got to go find $800,000 somewhere else in that draft, and it might be a combination of two picks. You might take a senior with your last pick and he signs for less. But it does depend on the situation, and it depends on what that specific player's numbers are.
Yeah.
And that number might change based on the team.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the Dodgers and you're a high school player and you see their track record with some of these high school players like Gavin Lux and Dustin May, you might have a lower number for the Dodgers than you would for a team that has not been as good developing high school players.
Yeah. Yeah, and even the sort of the seniors that maybe some years you could just pencil into a lower slot, as you said, seniors have more leverage. So that's an added complexity, I think, this year, is that there isn't a group of players who have no leverage. Every single player drafted has some degree of leverage, it seems like. So one thing I'm fascinated about, and we had an interaction about this on Twitter, is, again, I'm coming from NBA, NFL draft world, where the thing there is you can kind of look at a team's needs and say, okay, the Lakers need a big man or the Raiders need a linebacker, and say, okay, so the first round they're picking at 19, they're probably going to pick a linebacker. With baseball, my understanding, as you pointed out to me, is that teams aren't drafting for need, because we're talking about guys that are at best 2 years away, but more likely 3, 4, 5 years away from the major leagues. How do you go about projecting a pick at 29? I mean, is it just simply best player available, or is it a little bit more complicated when it gets specific for the Dodgers?
So for the Dodgers, they have primarily gone best player available, with no real tendency towards a particular positional group.
Okay.
I think if I was looking at their organization, and I just was talking about this with someone, they are heavier on bats, at least if you look all throughout their system. And a lot of their top pitching prospects, Dustin May, Tony Gonsolin, Josiah Gray, are at the top of the minor league ladder. And if you go down the minor league ladder, the high upside guys are almost all bats. And so if you're looking for organizational need, you'd say, yeah, there's a slight imbalance. They have a lot of bats. Maybe they'll take a pitcher. It's a deep pitching class. But that typically isn't how the Dodgers have played it. Now, if you're looking at an extreme case, like, say, the Angels, who desperately need major league pitching, and they don't really have any minor league pitcher contributors on the way, maybe next year or the year after, most of the guys that you'd look at as possible contributors are single A and below.
Interesting.
And so that's a team where if one of the top pitchers is available, that's an area where you might have to look, okay, we got this hitter evaluated slightly higher, but our window is now. We have Mike Trout, we have Anthony Rendon, we have Justin Upton. We're trying to win now. We're going to take a college pitcher who can get to the majors quicker. And even if he doesn't have the upside number one starter, like some of these high school, I feel more confident about him being a number 4 starter than we do other guys. And
got it.
I use the Angels because they are a good example for where they are in the draft. There are some college pitchers who have a higher floor that they could take. And also because it is an example of an extreme organizational need for a team that wants to win right now.
Got it. So if we're not looking at organizational need, if the Dodgers aren't going to sort of, Andrew Friedman's MO is not, we're not going to sort of overreact to a situation. We're just going to take what's in front of us. What can we learn maybe from the last 3, 4, 5 years of drafts? Is there a certain type of player that maybe the Dodgers prefer more than others, or is there a certain type of player that maybe they don't? I mean, I remember there were years where it was like the Dodgers really liked college guys versus high school guys, or they liked, college bats versus high school bats. I mean, is there anything we can learn that helps on the projections in that sense?
So they've taken every demographic in the first round over the past 5 years. They've taken a high school bat, taken Gavin Lux. They've taken a high school arm, JT Ginn, who's once again in this draft because he didn't sign. They've taken a couple college bats. They've taken quite a few college arms, Walker Buehler, most notable among them. And so there really isn't one
Okay.
particular direction we can say they like this demographic. What we have seen is they've been willing to take chances on guys who, talent wise, should go higher and fell due to one particular concern. Like Walker Buehler, there were worries about his arm health. He had Tommy John surgery right after the draft. Worked out for them.
Yeah.
But he fell in part because of that. Jaron Kendall, their first round pick in 2017, there were questions about his strikeout rate and his ability to hit for contact. He was considered, before the year started, a possible top 5 pick, and he fell, I believe, to pick 21.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have seen is they've been willing to take guys who have maybe one big concern, but talent-wise should go much higher.
Yeah. Unfortunately, and you could see exactly why, right? The Buehler one panned out perfectly, and the Kendall one, kind of everybody that passed on Kendall in front of the Dodgers is starting to look like they probably, and not to say it wasn't a risk worth taking, but it is interesting. Well, one other thing that's sort of fascinating to me, and you alluded to this, is the undrafted free agent pool. And I believe last time we had you on, we talked about this, but you said it, if you're not drafted in the first 5 rounds, then the most that you can sign for is $20,000. Now, college seniors can go back to school. High schoolers are obviously the ones that are going to be the most hurt because they've got to go to college for 3 years, or I suppose a junior college is an option as well. But when it comes to those, like what are you hearing about what undrafted free agency might look like? Are we talking about a scenario where nobody's going to sign, or, like the guys that would have been 6 through maybe 15 round draft picks, are those guys going to sign? Do the Dodgers have an advantage? What are you hearing about what people think that process might look like?
So, like you said, guys can go back into the draft next year. College juniors, college seniors, high school guys can go to JUCO, go back to the draft next year. But the big problem is, well, there's 2 big problems. Number one, you have an entire class of guys next year that you're competing with. And secondly, if you're a college junior right now, you're 21 years old, 4 months. You go back into the draft next year, you're a year older, and you're not only competing with the other kids in your class who are the same age as you, but you're also competing with kids who might be as talented as you, and they're a year younger. And with the way teams draft now, they place an emphasis on age relative to class.
Interesting.
So if there's a guy performing at a high level who's younger than most of the people in his class, he's going to get a boost up. Specifically, the model-heavy teams, the more analytical drafting teams like the Indians and the Astros, they're going to weight that heavily. And so you've got reasons to want to go pro. And the big reason not to go pro is the $20,000 bonus. You might get significantly more than that if you stay in school. And so I think we'll see primarily seniors, but there should be some juniors, depending on their situation, depending on whether they are worried about their playing time at their school, or, they just have the opportunity to go to a team they want and they're willing to do it. Or if perhaps they come from a higher income family and they can financially afford to take a lower bonus to go to their preferred team. There's a lot of different layers to it. Yeah. And I think we will know more as it starts to unfold. That's kind of the big mystery right now, because also, of course, we don't know who's going to be an undrafted free agent.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, we're not talking about a 26-round draft next year either, right? It's a 10-round draft next year. Am I right on that? 20 rounds.
So the owners have the ability to lower it to 20. Given that they lowered it to 5 this year, they should probably lower it to 20. I'd be shocked if they didn't. Yeah. And so it should be 20 next year. But you've got an entire class of kids next year, guys who are college sophomores right now will be college junior. Well, they'll be college sophomores again because of the extra year of eligibility, but they will all be draft eligible. And every junior that doesn't get drafted and every senior that doesn't get drafted now has to compete with those guys. And it's still a draft that is cut in half.
Yeah.
So it's tough. There are going to be some tough decisions being made. I definitely don't envy it for these athletes, it sucks. Yeah. No other words to it.
Yeah, I mean, because if we're talking about if you're a college junior and you go undrafted, and let's say, you're comparing, you have your pick of the litter, you can sign with any team for $20,000 versus next year you come back. Let's say you have a pretty good but not great year and you get drafted in the 10th to 12th round, somewhere in there. I mean, is the $50,000 difference or $80,000 difference between those two, getting to choose your team and just sort of having the certainty of no risk? I mean, these are the things that kids are going to have to start weighing. And I can't even, and there's no precedent for it, which I think is hard. So it'll be fascinating to watch. Well, let me get you out of here on this question. And I know projecting the 29th pick in this draft is dang near impossible. So let me phrase it a little bit differently. I'd love to hear one guy that you'd love the Dodgers to snag. And I know you've done research, so if you want to give me 2 or 3, I'm fine with that. But one guy that you would love for them to snag, obviously within reason. And then maybe if there's one guy that you've seen mocked to the Dodgers that you're kind of rooting against. And it's nothing against the person, obviously, but maybe just, hey, I don't love the fit. I'm not as high on this person as other folks. So just so as people are watching the draft on Wednesday, they have some names to keep in mind.
So I'll give you the top 3 on my board right now. The first one is Dylan Dingler. He's a catcher from Ohio State, and he's kind of a unique guy because he started in center field as a freshman. We know how much the Dodgers love their multi-positional guys, and of course, their multi-positional catchers.
Yeah.
He's a guy with throwing power, got a really strong arm, guy who can stay behind the plate, but can give you some defense in the outfield too. I don't think he'll be on the board at 29 with what we've been hearing lately. I think he'll be off. Well, before that, he could even go in the top 15. Okay. He might even be the first catcher drafted, but he's a top player on my board. And then I've got 2 right-handed pitchers, CJ Van Eyck from Florida State and Bryce Jarvis from Duke. Van Eyck, stuff-wise, talent-wise, he's a top 20, top 15 player in this class, but he's had some inconsistency, and the walk numbers have been a big problem for him throughout his career. And that's something for whichever team drafts him, they'll need to kind of work out those kinks. And then Bryce Jarvis, probably the best pitcher in college baseball this year. He threw a perfect game. Wow. He completely reinvented himself going to Driveline last year. He gained 20 pounds of muscle. He added some velocity to his fastball. He's now up to 97. And he's got 3 average to above average secondary pitches. Changeup is really good. Slider's really good. Curveball is average to above average. And he's an older guy. Okay. So if the Dodgers did take him at 29, they might be able to go under slot with him at that pick because of his age, because he has less leverage, and potentially go after one of these falling prep guys like you referenced in the second round with one of their 2 picks.
Now, I was just going to say, just for context, where are these guys falling on sort of your overall board? I mean, are these guys sort of in the 15 to 20-ish range overall, as far as big picture, if you had your pick of the litter?
So I have not done an overall board since I participated in a collaborative mock draft about a month ago. Okay. If I were to make an overall board now, I think those guys would all fall somewhere in the top 25. Okay. Probably the back half of the top 25.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
You're good. And then as for a guy who I hope they don't pick but has been linked to them, I think with what they do, I'm not really worried. I think if they see a fit, I trust their judgment. But I'm not too big on Jordan Westberg, who is a shortstop from Mississippi State. Now, he kind of fits the mold in what they like. He's a bigger shortstop. He's 6'3". Jeez. He hasn't gotten to all of his power. He's performed well in the summer collegiate leagues, the Cape Cod League, which is the most talented summer collegiate league. So you can project a little more power onto him. But he has struck out a bit. And, you worry about guys with a lot of strikeouts in college. He's not a given that he plays shortstop. He should sit there, but he might have to move to second base, might have to move to third base. I think he would be a guy that they would take because of the ability to project more power and maybe fits the approach. And you've got, a really toolsy guy. But at his current state right now, I'm not sure if he's the top of my list.
Okay. Well, let me ask you one more question. I know I said that was the last one. Is there a guy in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, somewhere in there that just for whatever reason you like more than most people, that you'd love to see them land somewhere later in the draft?
Yeah, I will go with Jesse Franklin. He's an outfielder from Michigan. He was hurt in a skiing accident last winter, and so he was supposed to come back. He missed the first part of the season, obviously never happened. And because of that, his draft stock is a little down because he never got to actually play compared to like most of the people in this class. Right now, he's being valued as maybe like a 4th round, 5th round pick. I would take him the 3rd, maybe even the end of the 2nd.
Wow. Okay. Okay, well, there you go. Well, I'm excited. We appreciate your time, Justin. We'll see you Wednesday. Justin and I are going to do a brief little recap on Wednesday night after the first round of the draft, and then Justin's going to be back with us next Monday as well to do a full recap. So, Justin, we appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us. All right, well, that will do it for us this week. And as always, we appreciate you tuning in. Please find us on YouTube, subscribe, like, comment, etc. And if you've got any questions specifically for Justin or for me, please leave them below, and we'll get to them next week. Of course, check out DodgerBlue.com throughout the week for the latest on the Major League Baseball negotiations as well as draft results. I know there's a great story up right now about Justin Turner and his wife, Courtney, who founded a food bank at the LA Dream Center, which was just unveiled. Dodger Blue was fortunate enough to be invited along by the Turners. We're the only folks out there covering it. So check that out on DodgerBlue.com. Shout out to the Turners for making the world a better place and supporting those in need. So for more stories like that, follow us at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at DodgerBlue1958. And with that, we'll see you next time.